There comes a time in the story of every nation when the spotlight is no longer requested, it is seized. India, once observed as the quiet, complicated democracy from the East, has stepped into that spotlight. Not by shouting for attention, not by demanding recognition, but by becoming undeniable. The world isn't watching India with mild curiosity anymore. It's watching with concern. Because in a landscape of global uncertainty, where economies shake, alliances shift, and leaders falter, India has done something rare. It has stabilized, it has multiplied, and most importantly, it has awakened. This awakening didn't happen overnight. It came through centuries of setbacks and seasons of silence, through times when the world wrote India off as a country of contradictions, a place of incense and innovation, poverty and poetry, tradition and transformation. But what the world didn't account for was India's quiet resilience, the kind that's forged in heat, sharpened by hardship, and anchored in ancient wisdom. See, the reason the world is worried isn't just because India is rising. It's how India is rising. India isn't copying, it's creating. It isn't pleading for inclusion. It's building new tables where invitations aren't required. The youth aren't escaping, they're leading. They're coding, creating, campaigning, and carving out a future that looks less like the West and more like something uniquely Indian, that alone shakes the old guard. For decades, there was a script. Emerging nations had to follow the same steps, bow to the same powers, repeat the same slogans of dependency. But India, it's tearing up the script. It's choosing to speak its own languages on the world stage, not just English. It's choosing to launch missions to Mars on budgets smaller than Hollywood movies, just to prove it can. It's choosing to protect its data, own its narratives, and invest in its rural heartlands as fiercely as its urban dreams. That worries the world, because what happens when a country starts playing by its own rules and still wins? When the West sees India make digital payments in seconds while it still writes checks, that's unsettling. When it sees India producing CEO for the world's largest corporations, not as exceptions, but as patterns, that's alarming. When it watches India's cultural exports dominate music charts, fashion trends, food shelves, and spiritual movements, all while being unapologetically Indian, that shifts the balance of cultural power. And cultural power, let's be honest, is the deepest kind of influence. What scares the world isn't just that India is growing, it's that India is growing without asking for permission. There was a time when India was seen only through the lens of its problems: overpopulation, poverty, pollution. But today, India is being seen through the lens of its potential, and potential is more dangerous than power. Power can be challenged. Potential, once awakened, is unpredictable. Every empire, every nation, every dominant power in history has had one fear: being replaced. They don't mind others rising, as long as it's not to the top. And now India is rising with an ambition that's quiet but undeniable. And the top, it's no longer out of reach. India isn't trying to be the next America or the next China. That's the real threat. It's trying to be the first India. That's why the world is watching with unease, because when a country with 4 billion people finds alignment between its government, its private sector, its diaspora, and its youth, momentum becomes irreversible. That's not just development, that's destiny being rewritten, and it's not just numbers, it's intent. India is investing in green energy while others argue about climate change. It's deploying digital public infrastructure that the world wants to copy. It's building roads, railways, runways, not to impress the world, but to connect its villages. That scares the old model where influence only flowed from the top down, never from the bottom up. Look at technology. India isn't just using apps, it's building them, running them, owning them, and when a country begins to own its digital infrastructure, it stops being a user and becomes a player that changes everything. Look at defense. India isn't interested in conquest, it's interested in capability. A nation that once relied on imports is now developing missiles, aircraft carriers, and AI-based warfare systems, not to provoke, but to protect. Yet, the more self-reliant India becomes, the less controllable it seems, and that makes the world nervous. The rise of India means old alliances must be renegotiated. It means treaties will need to be rewritten. It means organizations formed in the last century will have to make room for a voice that doesn't echo Western values but carries its own, and let's be honest, some aren't ready for that. Culturally, India is unapologetic. And that's powerful. When Indian women wear saris to boardrooms and Indian men speak in native tongues at global forums, they're not just representing identity. They're redefining what power looks like. Power no longer wears one uniform. It wears a kurta, a hoodie, a suit, sometimes all at once. And that makes the old gatekeepers very uncomfortable. India's rise is not a sprint. It's a long distance run. It's not about speed. It's about stamina. While others chase headlines, India builds highways. While others posture for cameras, India prepares for decades. That's the kind of growth you can't stop, only delay. The world used to worry about who had the biggest armies. Now it worries about who has the biggest ideas. And India is becoming a superpower of ideas. Philosophies that center on balance, consciousness, non-violence, and duty. Ideas rooted in thousands of years of spiritual and intellectual tradition. This isn't just soft power. This is soul power. But soul power doesn't come with slogans. It comes with silence, steadiness, and a refusal to be distracted. And India, more than any other nation today, is learning how to stay focused. The reason the world is worried is not because India might make mistakes. It's because India might succeed without making the ones others did. Because it might grow while staying true to its identity, because it might prove you don't have to colonize to be strong or imitate to be influential, India is showing that progress and pride can walk together. That growth doesn't require forgetting your roots, that becoming global doesn't mean becoming someone else, and that's revolutionary. There's a quiet power in knowing who you are. And India is beginning to show the world that it remembers. Not just its past, but its purpose. When you combine a population that's young, educated, and impatient with a culture that's ancient, grounded, and wise, you don't get chaos, you get combustion. You get a spark that lights up every corner of the world. Through startups, through cinema, through spirituality, through science. The old world order was based on geography. The new world order is based on gravity, and India is becoming the center of gravity in more ways than one. Economically, spiritually, demographically, digitally, it's not that India is rising to make others fall. It's rising to remind them of something they forgot, that real power is not domination, it's inspiration. That being feared isn't the same as being followed, and that nations, like people, must eventually stop competing with others and start becoming themselves. The question is no longer if India will rise. It's whether the world is ready, because for every headline that still mocks, there are 1,000 engineers who build. For every outdated stereotype that's repeated, there's a new stereotype being broken. For every leader who underestimates India's voice, there's a market, a movement, a moment being created that can't be ignored. India's rise isn't loud, but it is layered. It's not about taking over the world. It's about taking back its place in the world, a place that was always meant to be more than just a footnote in someone else's story. What the world is realize slowly, surely, nervously, is that India doesn't need validation. It needs vision, and it finally has that, in its leaders, in its people, in its youth. The future isn't being predicted anymore. It's being built brick by brick, bite by bite, and India is building faster than most expected, stronger than most believed, and smarter than most prepared for. So yes, the world is worried, but worry is just respect wearing the mask of fear, and as India rises, not perfectly, not linearly, but inevitably, the world won't have a choice but to adjust. Because this isn't the rise of a nation, it's the return of a civilization, and when a civilization that once gave the world zero, yoga, Ayurveda, chess, and non-violence begins to dream again, not of escaping, but of elevating, the world has two choices. Compete with that spirit or collaborate with it, but ignore it. That's no longer an option. India doesn't seek domination. It inspires by remembering who it is. That statement alone disrupts much of how global power has historically functioned. In a world shaped by conquest and colonization, the assumption has long been that strength means subduing, that to lead means to dominate, and that influence must be imposed. But India's rise challenges that assumption not with aggression or force, but with a deep and quiet certainty in its identity. It's not clawing for the top of the global hierarchy. It's simply walking forward with purpose, and the world can't help but turn its head. When a country knows who it is, it doesn't have to prove anything. That's what makes India different. It's not trying to be the loudest voice in the room, it's becoming the most centered. Its rise isn't about muscle, it's about meaning. While other nations race to outspend or outarm their rivals, India focuses on resilience, community, and continuity. The West is worried not because India is threatening war, but because it's threatening the idea that dominance is the only way to matter. India's power is not the power of fear, it's the power of attraction. This attraction is rooted in history. India isn't a new experiment. It's one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. Its philosophies, languages, scientific discoveries, and cultural traditions predate many of the modern nations that once ruled over it. India doesn't need to search for its roots. They are embedded in its soil, its stories, its scriptures, and its spirit. And as the world grows more disconnected and disoriented, the presence of a country so sure of its soul becomes magnetizing. Look around the world today. People are hungry for depth. They are overwhelmed by noise, overstimulated by technology, and disconnected from purpose. India doesn't just offer products or services. It offers perspectives. Yoga isn't just a trend. It's a global movement that began in the forests and temples of India, now practiced in every country not because India forced it, but because the world felt drawn to it. Ayurveda, Sanskrit, meditation, Vedantic philosophy, they don't dominate headlines, but they dominate hearts, not because India marketed them, but because it lived them. India's rise isn't about imposing itself onto the world, it's about inviting the world into something it already is. This is why domination was never the goal. Domination is rooted in insecurity. It needs validation through control. Inspiration, on the other hand, is rooted in confidence. It doesn't require control, it generates curiosity. And India is awakening global curiosity not by mimicking the West, but by being more Indian than ever. When India builds, it builds for its people, not to impress outsiders. When it innovates, it solves local problems, often in ways that outsiders later realize they can learn from. UPI, India's digital payments system, is not just a national success, it's becoming a global model. India didn't need to dominate markets to get noticed. It just had to do what made sense for its own people, with an efficiency and vision that made the world take note. That is the essence of true inspiration. It's not just infrastructure and technology. The same principle applies to India's diaspora. Indian origin professionals don't rise in global organizations because they're trying to dominate. They rise because their values resonate. Respect for family, education, hard work, adaptability. These are not just cultural quirks. They are superpowers. And these superpowers are quietly reshaping the leadership of the world's most powerful companies, hospitals, universities, and tech firms. India isn't conquering new lands, it's cultivating leaders who carry India's spirit into boardrooms and labs across continents. Even in foreign policy, India walks a unique path. While others rush to pick sides, India often chooses principle over pressure. It doesn't blindly follow the West, nor does it bow to Eastern giants. It chooses neutrality where it makes sense, and action where it's needed. It speaks for itself, not for blocs. That independence unnerves older powers who are used to nations falling into line. India's refusal to be anyone's pawn is precisely what makes it a player, again, not through domination, but through dignity. There's also something deeply human about India's rise. Unlike the sterile, sanitized visions of the future offered by some technocratic superpowers, India's development still feels alive. It's messy, yes, chaotic often, but it's also vibrant, soulful, and honest. There's an authenticity in India's growth story that makes it relatable. The street vendors with QR codes, the grandmothers on WhatsApp, the students studying in train stations, the villages going digital, these are not statistics. They are stories of real people transforming a country from within. They're not being programmed, they're participating, and in that participation lies a collective inspiration. India remembers its spiritual foundations not as a relic of the past, but as a compass for the future. Concepts like Dharma duty, ahimsa nonviolence, and karma action and consequence are not just religious ideas. They're civilizational operating systems. They shape how India deals with conflict, cooperation, and change. When a country internalizes the idea that true power comes from within, it no longer fears being underestimated. It simply stays the course. That's what India is doing. It's staying the course of who it has always been. And this remembrance is happening across generations. For a long time, colonialism made many Indians question their identity, even feel ashamed of their past. But the new India is reversing that damage. It's learning history not to hate others, but to love itself. It's reclaiming languages, literature, lost traditions. It's building museums and memorials not to dwell in pain, but to honor truth. And through this reclamation comes resurgence. Inspiration is also about scale, and India's scale is unmatched. 1 billion plus people doesn't just mean market size. It means potential. It means ideas tested at mass levels. Innovations in education, health, energy, and governance that work in India have global relevance. When India solves for itself, it often ends up solving for others. That's what makes its growth inclusive, not invasive. India is not trying to own the world. It's trying to own its narrative. For too long, others told India's story through movies, media, books, and biased metrics. But now India is telling its own story. Through Bollywood and Tollywood, through YouTube creators and software coders, through scientists and sportspersons, India is showing, not shouting, who it is. That storytelling matters. Because narratives shape reality, the more the world sees India as a force of creativity, compassion, and competence, the more it questions the old power equations. And every time a child in a remote village watches an Indian astronaut on TV, every time a woman entrepreneur sells handmade goods to the U.S. via an app, every time a rural farmer accesses a loan using just his fingerprint, a message is sent to the world. domination isn't the only way forward. Empowerment is, and India's empowerment is contagious. When Africa watches India succeed while staying sovereign, it gets inspired. When Southeast Asia sees India invest in solar power while preserving tradition, it learns. When the global South watches India negotiate fair vaccine deals, it gains hope. India is not the global South's savior, it's its mirror, and in that mirror many see possibility. This is the part that unsettles those used to defining power in terms of military bases or GDP spikes. India isn't marching armies across borders, it's spreading ideas, it's not annexing territory, it's expanding influence, it's not exporting ideology, it's exporting tools of education, of development, of design, that others can use on their own terms. India's soft power isn't soft because it's weak. It's soft because it doesn't force, it invites, and invitations are far harder to resist than instructions. When a country invites you into its culture, its cuisine, its music, its mindset, it doesn't just sell you something. It transforms you. What India remembers is what many others forgot in their pursuit of dominance, that leadership is service, that to rise is not to look down on others, but to lift, that to influence is not to impress, it's to ignite. India's path is not perfect, no country's is, but what sets India apart is that its imperfections are visible and evolving. It doesn't hide its contradictions, it holds them in balance, and in a polarized, fragile world, that balance becomes rare and remarkable. The anxiety the world feels about India's rise is really the anxiety of obsolescence. Old models of power are cracking, old hierarchies are fading, and in their place a new rhythm is emerging, one that doesn't beat to the drum of dominance, but hums with harmony. India doesn't need to overpower others to prove it belongs. It already belongs, it always has, and now that it remembers, the world must reckon with a simple truth. When a nation knows who it is, no one can tell it who to be.